Welcome to Frankly, My Dear, the podcast that explores just how bananas things were in classic Hollywood. Classic Hollywood was wholesome, right? People talk about the films with such nostalgia and wish for those days back. But what I find more interesting is the seedy underbelly, the backstory, the movie trivia, the backdrop of those films and what went on behind the scenes. These were real people. They had their own stories. They soldiered on to create these films that you so love, and I appreciate even more now by knowing their lives and struggles. So join me as we uncover the mystery and peel back the velvet curtain of classic Hollywood to not just highlight the scandals, but the triumphs of these film giants. Hello everyone, welcome to Frankly, My Dear. Today I am going to be talking about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. It was actually chosen by an overwhelming majority. I polled my social media accounts to find out which Howard Keel movie you guys might like me to talk about for his birthday, which was actually yesterday, the 13th of April. He was born in 1919. So I threw out Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Kiss Me Kate, Pagan Love Song, and you guys chose by an overwhelming majority that you wanted me to talk about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. So I will admit that I have some mixed feelings about this film, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit as well. So I know it is very well loved. There's a huge amount of nostalgia for this movie, and I get it. And I'm going to talk about the story origins, which are part of the issue. And however, the athleticism in the dancing, there is no equal. I love other dancers, Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire. They all have their great numbers and great moments. This one, the cast that they brought together, the athletic ability in everyone is super impressive. So I will be going into that, and I will keep in mind all the nostalgia involved in this film. It seems to be very well loved. I didn't see it growing up. I saw it later. So again, I have some mixed feelings about it, but in researching and revisiting it, I do have some additional insights that I would like to share with you and can see why it's so well loved. So let's get started. We are going to first start with the cast, and then we will get into the story a little bit, how it compares to Sabin Women, which was a short story. We will get into that next. So first, we have to talk about Howard Keel, right? I love Howard Keel. I think he is very talented. He is one of the best singers from that era. He has a very commanding voice. He is very impressive, but he doesn't dance, really. So he and Jeff Richards, who played Benjamin, both of those two didn't dance, really. The other five did. So it is a very large cast, and you definitely have the people who stand out a little bit more and the people that are a little bit more memorable. Howard Keel is one of them. He was last in films like Kiss Me Kate, Calamity Jane, which are two of my favorite performances of his, and Rosemary, which I'm not as familiar with, and then he came into this. So he played Adam, and he is the eldest brother. The brothers are all named in alphabetical order through Gideon, who is the youngest. And then you have the woman that plays Adam's wife, the one who decides to marry him, is played by Jane Powell. She plays Millie. And her last film was Three Girls and a Sailor. She was actually born in Oregon, where this takes place. So they are the main couple of the entire film, but we have 6 other couples to work with, right? It's a lot of people. Again, they don't all stand out. Some of them blend a little bit together. So I mentioned Jeff Richards, who was an actor. He was actually a professional baseball player before he became an actor. They insisted on using people that were under contract, and they were like, hey, we can get you a few dancers, but not all of the brothers can be dancers. So he played Benjamin, and his counterpart was Dorcas, which I thought was a really weird sort of name, but apparently it was a name. And that was played by Julie Newmar, who is most famous for playing Catwoman in the Adam West Batman TV show, right? She played Catwoman, and then you had Eartha Kitt come in later. So She is recognizable. Unfortunately, because she was paired with Jeff Richards, she didn't get to do as much dancing, which she was disappointed about, and that came up. But she did have a strong dancing background. She had actually been in uncredited dance parts before this, including the bandwagon. So she was kind of up and coming. But again, unfortunately, she didn't get to showcase her dancing that much. There was the June Bride number, and she did get a little bit more screen time in that. She just didn't have the huge barn raising dance that this film is most famous for. She didn't really get to do anything in that, unfortunately. Another couple we have, I'm going to skip to the man who played Frank because he is the next most recognizable one. It's Tommy Rowell. And he is one of my favorites, honestly. The film before this that he did was Kiss Me Kate with Howard Keel, again, one of my favorites. And that was his first real role. Before that, he had been an uncredited dancer in Good News, which starred Peter Lawford. And he does have that dancing background. He studied tap, acrobatic dance, ballet at an early age. So he is very skilled and very pleasant to watch. So his lady in the film was Betty Carr, which I couldn't really find as much about her. There wasn't as much to go off of. She played Sarah. And then we're going to get into the next most recognizable guy in this, who was Rust Hamblin. He is still around. So is Julie Newmar. He played Gideon. So he was the youngest. And he was only 19 when they made this. And he was a super gifted acrobat. So you really get to see that in the barn raising dance. He does backflips and he is just very fun to watch. He'd been in the Father of the Bride films also with Elizabeth Taylor and Spencer Tracy. And then his lady in the film is Nancy Kilgus, who plays Alice. In her filmography, it's mostly uncredited dancing otherwise, so she wasn't as well known either. The people who play Caleb and Ruth, Matt Maddox and Ruta Lee, similar thing. Matt Maddox was chosen for his dancing ability. Ruta Lee doesn't have as much of a filmography either, which is a lot of the case with some of these other brothers and brides. Then you have the man who played Daniel, who is Mark Platt, and the one who played Martha was Norma Doggett. So Mark Platt, his ballet background, his dancing ability got him this part. Norma Doggett, she was actually discovered by choreographer Jack Cole while working as a line dancer at the Chez Paris Supper Club. And then the last couple we have is Jacques, I'm going to say this wrong, D'Ambrose, who played Ephraim. He was a ballet dancer. And Virginia Gibson, who played Liza. And again, there's not as much to go off of there. So that rounds out all 7 couples. Again, some of them are more recognizable. You have Howard Keel and Jane Powell as the main couple. Tommy Rowell is in here. Rust Hamblin, those are really the most recognizable at this point. So now we are going to get into the story origin, and hopefully people aren't too mad about this, but it is a little bit problematic. So let's talk about the story origins and get that out of the way. So it was based on a short story, The Sabin Women, as I mentioned earlier, which you probably recognize that title just because it's also a song in the film. They name it that. Although they didn't use that title for the movie, they thought that people wouldn't go see it if it was called that, which was a fair assumption, really. And that was written by Stephen Vincent Benet and published in 1937. The problem here is that was that short story that this is based on was also based on the rape, or if you prefer a nicer word, the abduction of the Sabine women. And I'm not going to deep dive into this as much, but it was a tale from ancient Rome where basically the men kidnapped these women from other cities by Romulus and his followers. The intent was really to impregnate them and have them increase the population because there weren't as many women there and they were afraid that they were going to die out, basically. So whether or not they gave these women a choice in joining them or not is debatable. I found information about both of them. Either they gave them a choice or they just took them. So even Benet had taken inspiration from this tale to write The Sabin Women, which placed this sort of idea in the frontier country. So There are key differences between the short story and the film in terms of the storyline itself. So, in the short story, it gives some more background. It has the parents and that they go to town every once in a while with their family, and it shows us the entire family. And at that point, at the beginning of the story, it has the oldest as 9 and the youngest as a baby. So it establishes them as outsiders, has the parents, they die once they grow up, and then their hired woman that they had doing all the stuff around the house dies as well. So this is reflected in the film. Basically, we start out with Adam. He's going into town to get a wife, and then we see how dirty the house is and how unkept, and apparently they have trouble eating because they don't know how to cook. In the short story, his name is Harry. All of the brothers instead have H names instead of it being an alphabetical situation. In the short story, they decide that they need a woman to come and take care of the house because they don't know what they're doing. So in the short story, instead of it automatically being the oldest, they actually fight about it. They try to get him to do it, and then they end up drawing straws and he loses anyway. So then he's the one that has to go into town to get somebody to marry him. In the film, though, Adam is more excited about this prospect. Like, he wants to go find somebody. In the short story, this is not the case. He doesn't really want to be the one to go. So we have Howard Keel singing Bless Your Beautiful Hide, which is kind of funny, kind of weird, and describing the kind of woman he's looking for and that kind of thing. So instead of all of the requirements that the song brings up in the short story, Harry, again, that's his name in the short story, decides that he's just going to marry the first girl he sees. Unfortunately, the first one is married, and then the second one is too young. The third one is the minister's daughter, and she runs away, which we do have the minister's daughter in the film too, but not as his wife. So then he finds Millie, so that name is the same, and she is called a bound girl. So he has to buy out her time that she's working for this innkeeper. And then before they leave, she insists on him taking her shopping to buy fabric so she can make dresses. So she agrees to marry him, and she's all excited. Similar to the film, Jane Powell sings about it instead, and thinks that she's getting a better deal here. In the film, also, Adam does not tell her that there are all these other people she's going to have to take care of. In the movie, it feels a little bit more cruel because Adam is hearing her go on and how excited she is that her life is going to change, all the while knowing what is waiting for her. And he says nothing, right? Because, well, I'm sure he doesn't want her to be upset, and he doesn't want that she wouldn't have married him. So that seems a little bit manipulative, honestly. And then in the short story, it's interesting because you have Millie really being the mastermind of the entire thing. Harry, or the Adam character, watches her and he recognizes how hard she works, which is different than the film. He is not the one that suggests they go and kidnap these women for wives. It's actually Millie in the short story, which is very interesting to me. So, what she does, because she realizes she needs help, right? This is a lot of work for her. There's a lot of dudes she has to take care of, all of this. So, she works really hard and doesn't complain at all in the short story. And she just keeps getting thinner and thinner and doesn't complain. But then, this is where Harry is more observant than Adam. He's like, okay, you need to take a rest. This is too much for you. You're not taking care of yourself. So he shows concern over what is happening to her. And then he tells her repeatedly that she needs to take a break. And that is not what happens in the film. So in the short story, at this point, she also reveals that she's pregnant. So then the men come up with this idea of, oh, we really need to help her and we need to get another woman here. So it's not just all on her. So in the short story, they really, and in the film too, they seem to care about her, right? But here it is their idea for just a minute. So each of them in the short story goes into town with the purpose of trying to find somebody to marry them. They all get turned down. So it almost feels like Millie's like, okay, you guys had one job here and you all failed. Now, she is the one in the short story, not the film, because we know it's Adam in the film that sings the Sobbin' Women and instigates that whole process of, hey, let's just go take them. In the film, they are concerned that the brothers want to leave because they've already met these girls. In the short story, Millie is the one that brings up the Romans and the idea to kidnap them and marry them. So in the short story, the men resist this, but she pushes them. So this is where that's interesting. Now they go to essentially the big barn raising thing at this point. So this is where they kidnap him. And Millie takes an active role in this kidnapping, which does not happen in the film. So they all pull guns on them, and then they lock the other townspeople in the meeting hall where this thing was happening and take these women. So including Millie, including her threatening them. And then there's the blizzard and they get stuck. So in the film, again, it's Adam who pushes this because he's like, I've been reading her book and this is what happens. So they do still reference the Roman thing, but he actually thinks he's helping. He's trying to help. He's just oblivious. The Harry character in the short story is not oblivious, and Millie is the one that pushes this. So it feels like in the short story, she's like, okay, all these guys are incompetent. I'm going to have to do this myself. I need help. So she's the one that masterminds this, which again, I found really interesting. And then she kind of manipulates the women a little bit, saying that she wouldn't have done this if she knew how upset they would be, and then starts talking about how worthless they are. And then the girls end up finding wedding dresses that she made, and then they start like trying them on, and then they are really into this. So they did actually have somebody at that point then marry them who was there trapped during the blizzard, whereas in the film they forgot the minister, right? So they couldn't do this. She's like, okay, marry them. So they, in the short story, they all get married, and then she tells the men to go back to the stables afterwards anyway, and then she does this thing where she lets them call on them 3 afternoons a week and they all get along. And so then they're already married before the thaw comes, which is not the case in the film. In the film, they start looking at these men and start falling in love with them, and they're there for 6 months. In the meantime, Adam has had a hissy fit because Millie's mad at him, and he goes to this other cabin and stays there for the winter, not ever finding out she's pregnant. But that does not happen in the short story. In the short story, when the townspeople come, Millie has this thing where she has them in another room and one of them's humming and one of them's doing other things. And she's like, don't they sound happy? They sound happy, right? To these townspeople. And then she's like, you're just all going to stay for supper. Everybody's fine. And then she introduces them to their new sons-in-law. And that's the end of the short story. So I find it very interesting. As I said, like in the film, and I made a post about, is Adam the villain? Villain is probably too strong of a word. He's the antagonist and he's oblivious to a lot and thinks he's trying to help and just goes about it all wrong and has this like, I'm the man attitude, right? But in the short story, Harry is paying attention and watching, and Millie is the mastermind. Because again, it feels like she just thought they were all incompetent and had to deal with it herself, right? So she's more the antagonist of the short story, which I found that very interesting because I don't know if that would have gone over well if they had kept that for the film. In the film and in the short story, Millie is a very, very strong character. She's a very strong woman. She pushes Adam and kicks them out and is like, you guys are going to shape up. You are not going to fight. You are going to do all these things. And then she tries to teach them how to approach these women to court them instead. And then Adam's the one that like swoops in and is like, let's just take them. And then, so it's just very interesting to me that they made that choice. Because again, I don't know that it would have gone over well to have Millie be kind of a villain and be the manipulator of everything. because that is how she comes across in the short story. And then just to go back to Adam for a minute. So, as I said, he's oblivious through the whole thing. He eventually gets to his redemption at the end, but it's very quick. It's very glossed over. He realizes, hey, I have this daughter. How would I feel if some dudes came and took her? So then he decides that the women should go back. He's like, hey, let's take them back. And then, of course, they don't want to go back because now they love the other dudes. So again, he does get his redemption, but it's very, very at the end. And then Millie's just like, okay. So it's just interesting. And then the Millie in the short story never redeems herself, really doesn't apologize for anything. It's just like, hey, they're totally fine. They're happy now. So stay for supper. It's just an interesting dynamic how different that is. Now we're going to get into some of the making of the film. And first of all, we had Stanley Donen as the director. He is a great director. He also did On the Town, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Singing in the Rain, which incidentally, I found this interesting and I didn't know this before. Howard Keel was actually originally considered for Singing in the Rain instead of Gene Kelly. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but Gene Kelly is iconic in that film. So it would have been a completely different movie with Howard Keel, because again, he's not really a dancer. So the film was to be released in widescreen CinemaScope, which is what we see now. It was the first time MGM was doing this. But the problem was that many theaters didn't have the equipment to accommodate CinemaScope at that time. So the film was actually shot twice. And they had to make two movies, and it was a lot of work for nothing because the non-CinemaScope was actually never ended up being used. So the big thing was you had all of these people and these big numbers, and you needed to be able to show them all. Otherwise, it would have cut out so much of the film, right? So Stanley Donen wanted to shoot on vacation, and he wanted to take an entire year to do this film because he wanted to show and capture all of the seasons. He wanted it to be as real as it could be. Instead, MGM did not have all that much faith in this movie, so they decided to cut the budget. And they instead gave it to Brigadoon, which they thought would be a bigger deal, which Brigadoon is a beautiful movie as well. Also not shot on location, I don't think, because it just looks different too. But they had to do it then on the soundstage. They couldn't film on location. They didn't have the money to do it. So that is unfortunate. And the people involved in making it were not very happy with that because it just doesn't look real. You have the paintings are beautiful, but it doesn't have that realistic feel to it because they weren't able to shoot on location. So the music in this really takes the film to another level because, as I said, like the story origin, if we want to get into it, it is about a mass abduction of a bunch of women. So that doesn't necessarily age well as a concept. And Stockholm Syndrome, whatever, you still have it in films and in books and whatever, but that part of it is a little bit icky, even though it ends up okay in the end. And I mean, if you want to come at me, Beauty and the Beast is Stockholm Syndrome 2, and there's another layer of weirdness there that is something from the 90s that I grew up with a bit. So it's not like they gave up that idea. So anyway, you had Michael Kidd as the choreographer. Brilliant, brilliant idea. The other thing I knew him from to begin with was It's Always Fair Weather, where he danced. So they brought in Michael Kidd, who is brilliant. He's one of the best choreographers of the classic movie era. He is outstanding. And originally, though, he didn't want to do it. He had just finished up a show. He was tired. He didn't want to jump into a movie. He was going to take a break. But they asked him to listen to the score, and he thought it was wonderful, but he couldn't see the characters dancing. He couldn't envision it. Here were these backwoods sort of lumberjacky dudes, and he just didn't see it. So Stanley Donen convinced him anyway, but Michael Kidd originally only agreed to stage the songs because he couldn't see that. He didn't think that they would be dancing. He didn't think it would work. So they kind of forced him into this meeting with the producer, and Donen was like, okay, well, we need dances in here since we have Michael Kidd. And Michael was mad because he was like, I did not agree to this. And it was a whole thing. He was not happy that they forced him into this originally. But again, it ended up being some of his most brilliant work in his entire filmography. So turned out okay. Casting started. They wanted all dancers. The studio said they had to use some of the actors who were not working. So one of them was Russ Tamblyn, who I mentioned, very, very skilled acrobat. And Michael Kidd was talking to him and he's like, I understand you do some tumbling, right? And so Russ just like did a backflip in front of him because it was easy for him. Like he was thin and strong and young and had this background, knew how to do these things. And then Michael Kidd was like, awesome, we're going to put it in a number. And then Russ Tamblyn was like, but I'm not a dancer. And Michael Kidd was like, well, it's really like square dancing. We'll work it out. So Russ actually said in an interview that it might have been better for him than the dancers because for the barn raising scene, which is the most brilliant, athletic sort of dance that we've ever seen. So they were dancing on these boards. And he said, since he was a tumbler, he could do a lot that the dancers couldn't do. So it really became a great showcase for him to show what he could do. And Russ said that Michael Kidd actually wanted all of the brothers to be dancers, except then Howard Keel would be in the lead. So they didn't quite get that. As I said, they cast Jeff Daniels, who was not a dancer. If you watch the Going Courtin' number where they all dance with Jane Powell, you will notice he's not dancing. He's sitting and he's like clapping and or like tapping his foot or something. So he doesn't get in on that. But one of the dancers, as I mentioned, was Tommy Rahl. He said that it was really fun to work on the film. Howard Keel has also said it's one of his favorites. Tommy Rahl said that they would play jokes on set and put water buckets on the top of a door so it would fall on people. And he said that they had a lot of fun, and it really rings true because they kind of became family as they were playing family, and you can see that sort of chemistry between them. They work really well together. And as I mentioned, a few of them had a ballet background. Matt Maddox, Mark Plath, Jacques D'Ambrose. Actually, Jacques D'Ambrose had to leave. He worked with the New York City Ballet. He had to leave because the shooting ran long and he was supposed to be back to perform. So he actually left, and then he said that the scene at the end is actually not him. They dressed somebody else as him, stuck him in the background so you couldn't really tell the difference. So that scene where Millie's having the baby, it's not him in there because he's already gone. And then you have Howard Keel and you have also the brilliant Jane Powell, who I really enjoy. I think she was a fabulous dancer, fabulous singer. I really like her in Royal Wedding as well. And she is just brilliant to watch. She said when she got on set, she hadn't met like any of the other people before. She also liked that this was a more modern pioneer woman. She was a stronger character. Jane thought that as well, and so did I, because she tried to make them better. So when she first gets there, the first meal she makes them, they're tearing into it like savages, right? She gets really mad. She ends up upending the table because they have no manners. And she's just like, nope, you're not getting it. And then one of my favorite parts, besides the barn raising scene, my other favorite part is when she, the next morning, decides to wash their clothes and then wants the rest of them and then tries to go in there and take them from them after they don't want to give them to her because they only have the one pair left. That is really funny. And then them sitting at the table with blankets around them because they have no clothes left. So that scene and just the strength that she portrays and just is like, no, this is what we're doing. So you are going to shape up. And then her teaching them how they could go about trying to find a wife. And they really do try. They do. But the guys in the town are not nice to them. They start fights during this barn raising, right? Whereas the brothers were really trying not to start a fight. And then Adam pushes them too because he's like, why are you taking this from these towns guys? Which I kind of understand his point, but he is the one that pushes them to accelerate the fight, basically. And Jane Powell actually asked to be in the barn raising number because she wasn't originally supposed to. And Michael Kidd said that she could, which I think adds something to it too. And my favorite part of that scene is when the guys are dance battling with the towns guys up on these boards, and then the towns guys ends up falling off, and then a bunch of the brothers go up and dance, including Tommy Rowell and some of the ballet dancers. And then you have Russ Tamblyn go up there and do a backflip on it, which is super impressive because you have these small pieces and you have to be exact with your landing. And I thought that was really cool. So again, it is one of the most brilliant numbers. And that is due a lot to Michael Kidd because his condition for the musical numbers was that they had to come naturally from the characters' motivations, and it had to make sense. Like, he didn't just want to drop numbers in there because it had to make sense with what they were doing, right? And he wanted to do the other really impressive scene, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, is the polecat number, which is super cool because they're like swinging axes around and they're all morose and sad, and it is one shot. So that took them a while to get correct. And it's really cool that when they do a long shot like that, because you know that everything had to be right for that shot to work. But he wanted to make it believable to the plot. Michael Kidd, again, he really made this film. You have the talent of the dancers, which was a big deal, but to have somebody put all of that together and make that as brilliant as it was, they needed Michael Kidd. In addition to the dance numbers, the other thing that Michael Kidd choreographed was the whole fight in the barn. So all the stuff falling, he actually asked a stagehand to bring all of the stuff that would be around when they were doing a barn raising. So sawhorses and the planks and all of the tools and everything. And he incorporated into that. And Tommy Rowell said that the actual scene took them 3 weeks of rehearsals just to get that dance down. He said that they actually, so I mentioned the planks, Tommy Rowell said that they had them on the ground and practiced there and then would slowly raise them up. So like if they fell, then it wouldn't be as big of a deal. So they were practicing and making sure that they could hit that because, again, somebody could get hurt. Then there was a contest that broke out between Russ Tamblyn and Tommy Rowell, and they were trying to see who could do better tricks, and apparently it scared the other people because they just kept trying to do more dangerous stuff. So again, it sounds very much like it had like that brother feel to it, which I think comes through on the film as well. Again, the marketing department realized no one would go if they kept it as the Sobbin' Women, if they kept it as that short story title. So they decided it was going to be A Bride for Seven Brothers. Censors had an issue with that because it sounds like it's one woman for seven dudes, right? Then they changed it to Seven Brides for Seven Brothers so that they don't have that issue. The other issue that censors had was the line in the polecat number, a man can't sleep when he sleeps with sheep. So I can see how that could be an issue. So the way they got around that is they just didn't have any sheep in the scene, and then apparently it was fine. So there wasn't anything to build issue with. Some of the artistic concessions, as I mentioned, the scenes were filmed up against a backdrop. They also used stock shots with the avalanche, and they had to build a miniature to make that fall and look that way. The Wonderful Day set, they also had an issue with because that looks super fake. It's not a great set. The background isn't great. And Stanley Donen said there actually had birds released, but they would fly into the backing because they would get confused. So the birds thought it was real, I guess, but nobody else did. And again, it was thought more of as a B movie. They had more faith in Brigadoon, but people loved it and it was a commercial success. The New York City opening was huge. They were nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, which they lost to On the Waterfront. They were also nominated for Best Writing, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, and Best Music/Score. So that's the one that won. So it did win an Oscar for Best Music. And it was also one of the last musicals to come out of MGM. That is quite a bit of information about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Again, I had mixed feelings on it just because of the mass abduction, because of where the story came from. And I know this is putting modern day thinking on a 1950s movie, but it still is something to consider. Though, in researching it and reading the original story and just deep diving into it more, I actually do appreciate it more. So I already appreciated the dancing. Again, there's no question how stellar it is. And when you look at how strong of a character Millie is and how many times she puts these guys in their place, you can see that it isn't all, downgrading to women, basically, even though they do end up kidnapping them. Her strength is what makes up for that a bit. And the fact that Adam gets put in his place, he does have his redemption arc. The end is a little bit weird with the baby, and then the townspeople agreeing, oh, we don't know whose baby this is, so it could be any of them, so they all better get married. Like, that is a little bit weird to me. But the original ending was weird too. So there you go. So I feel like with this one, you can appreciate the strength of Millie, especially. Can even appreciate her a little bit in that short story with how, even though she is the mastermind of the kidnapping, but she just has this inner strength that comes through. And then the brilliant barn raising number. I cannot stress that enough. That is amazing. So here's an insider look at Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And I will end up doing more polls. I thought this was fun to have other people pick what I was going to talk about. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it for those musical numbers. Thank you.